I'm Mark. I am, as Dora said, I'm a board member of Nonprofit Net, and I have known the speaker today for some time. Many of you have probably read his biography. Among other things, he's been the executive director of, or CEO of three nonprofit organizations, so he really knows whereof he speaks from a practitioner standpoint. He's also now principal partner at Eos Transition Partners. And I simply, as a point of personal privilege, I would have to say, I have referred a number of clients to John who are seeking executive directors, including some pretty complicated situations. And he's just done a remarkable job. So just a personal endorsement of John and his partner, Nancy Jackson, who are both wonderful. So John, I'm not going to do a lengthy introduction. I think your biography is available to folks on the website, and welcome, and it is all yours.
Thanks, Margot. Yeah, Margot has sent quite a bit of work my way, which I really appreciate. And we were just talking about one client who will remain nameless that she still probably owes me a dinner for, but that's okay. But but we had fun with that one too. So thanks everybody for coming today, and thanks for letting me do this. This is fun to talk about. So I put together a little slide deck. Do you want to open it on your end, or do you want me to open it on mine?
Whatever makes sense for you. I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, why don't you open it if you don't
Okay.
mind? Maybe you could share it from your end. And I've started with, and as we're opening up the slide deck, the first slide was just to give you a little grounding on us as an organization. So our firm is called Eos Transition Partners. We started fortuitously right at the beginning of the pandemic, January of 2020. But my partner, Nancy, and I have been doing executive search for 10 to 15 years combined. We're a national firm, though we predominantly work in New England and the Northeast. And, we serve all nonprofit sectors. We have some areas where we work a little more formally and a little more directly. We work with a lot of community development corporations. We do a lot of work in education, social service-based nonprofits. We've also done quite a bit in the environmental space as well. We predominantly do ED, CEO, president level searches, the top position in any organization, but we also do C-suite searches. So we'll do CFO, Chief Operating Officer, Chief Program Officer. I'm going to advance the slide one. Would you mind going one more, Dora? Thank you. We've combined, we've completed over about 190 searches. And we're also a member of an organization, which many of you probably won't know, which is called NNSC, which is a network of nonprofit search consultants, which is a national network of like-minded search practitioners like ourselves. There's about 90 of us that are members. I happen to be the chair of the organization right now. And we are, we share best practices. It's predominantly a group that's very committed to what's going on in the nonprofit recruiting space. So they're all mission-based recruiting firms like our own. So it's a good group. You can look them up, nns.org, and it'll list all around the country people that are akin to us. The one other thing that I didn't put on the slide about us, we also run a program called Threshold, which my partner Nancy Jackson runs, which is about a retiring baby boomers, sort of what's next for them in their career and their lives. And we found it really helpful. It's a cohort model where they meet 4 times for a couple hours each, and then she works them through a whole process of how to transition out of their current positions and what that might mean for them as well as their organizations. And we also run one that's about not people that are retiring, but people that are transitioning around organizations they worked at a long time and sort of what's next for them career-wise. So that's a little bit about us. It's my partner, Nancy, and I. We have 4 search consultants that work with us as well as a recruiter. So we've got a group of about 7 of us as a group. Maybe I will have you advance, Dora, if you're not, if you're okay with that.
No problem.
Yeah. So I just thought, just to ground a little bit about what we've seen in the search practice. So as I said, I'm a member of NNSC, and we just surveyed our membership, again, which represents a broad base across the country that probably do collectively, 1,000, not 1,000, maybe 500 searches to a year collectively. And we asked in our group, we just did a meeting in Seattle last week. And before that meeting, we asked our group, what's business look like? So as you could see, there is plenty of work still in the nonprofit search space. 49% of our members said it was good and growing. 29 said good, but plateauing. And by plateauing, we had such growth as a sector in 2021 and 22 that it's sort of plateauing. The work was off the charts in 21 and 22, and now it's plateauing. Couple people feeling neutral, about 14%, but only 8 said not meeting expectations. So the reason I want to share that with you is there's a lot of transition still ongoing in the nonprofit space. So we're feeling it from our own point of view as firms. And what we've also noticed is we've done more C-level searches since the pandemic than we did prior. And some of that we think is attributed to 2 things. One is a lot of organizations got more money in the pandemic through either ARPA money or whatever money. So they had a little bit more money to put towards search. But the other side is firms that or nonprofits that didn't feel they were sizable enough or had the funding to pay for a C-suite search decided they had to because the competition was so fierce and they weren't finding anyone on their own. So we've seen an increase of C-level searches, predominantly nonprofits in the $1 million to $25 million a year budget space would only pay for a search for their chief executive. They really couldn't justify a C-level search, but a lot have found that justification out of having a little more money, but also just the sheer need of it's really competitive out there. So I just want to set that little bit of grounding. I got about 5 or 6 slides, and then we've mostly built in time for Q&A, but I just thought it'd be helpful to go through the slides first, and then we'll take some Q&A. Do you mind advancing, Dora, to the next slide? So one of we phrase this as this session is, why is it difficult to recruit? And then we've given you some ideas about how you can position yourself well as a nonprofit to recruit better. So I'd say the biggest challenges we've seen is as everyone knows, COVID and post-COVID retirements were off the charts. People that just didn't want to deal with COVID and were close to a retirement a year out, they just left, to be honest with you. Many just decided it was the time to go. And then a number of people stayed through COVID as leaders, but what they were challenged with is they were not only leading their nonprofits, but they felt like they were also leading a healthcare organization. So not only, regardless of what they were doing in nonprofits, so we do a lot of work with community development corporations, but they were all of a sudden not only running a community development corporation, they had to worry about the health and welfare of their staff, all their residents and their rental properties. So they wound up being both a CEO of their mission-based nonprofits, but also being a mini healthcare provider, and it tired a lot of people out. And again, they stepped away from those jobs. So one of the big challenges is a lot of senior leadership just stepped away from 2020 to 2023. We see a little bit of less of that right now than before, but it was a big loss of people. And a lot of those people had been in their jobs for 20 to 30 years. We've done, just to give you to scare you a little, we did one replacement of a person that founded his organization 50 years ago and ran it for 50 years. We did another where a gentleman ran it for 40 years after founding it. He unfortunately passed away. I can't tell you how many leaders we replaced that were there 25 to 40 years since the pandemic. So just the sheer volume of retirement and the sheer expertise that left the sector was pretty big. The other thing that I'm sure most of you know this is the demographic pool that follows the baby boomers is just smaller. So the people that not as many people were born in the millennial generation, and the group between 30 and 50 is just is a much smaller by numbers than the group that was 60 to 80, right? So there's just less people that are rising up. And some of them had to be pushed into leadership sooner than they may have been ready for. people have really, the remote hybrid expectations is become a recruiting challenge. People got so used to being either remote or hybrid that, it's, you say it's a 5-day-a-week job in the office and people almost break out in hives, so it's like, it's really, so sort of managing that challenge is what's right for my organization and how flexible I can or want to be with a new hire, is things that people are still working out. And I think most of you will see or have read, if you're involved in the corporate space, they're still struggling with this too, like how much they want to force their employees to come back or not. As a former very active tennis player who aged out of tennis, I now play pickleball with all the other with all the other old tennis players. And one of my colleagues works at Fidelity as a senior person there at Fidelity. And he said, we've got to come back 1 week, every other week they're back full time now. So they're remote a week, then they're in the office for a week. And he said, we're probably going to lose a lot of people in the 25 to 35-year age range. They're just going to quit. And they sort of know that's going to happen. So that's a challenge in your recruiting, is how flexible can you be? And some nonprofits, given their mission, it has to be on the ground. It has to be in person. Others have more flexibility. And then you run into disparities of people that are doing on the ground work, which tend to be lower paid positions, are forced to be there while the executives aren't there. So now you've got a whole problem of equity and within the organization to manage. So all these transitions have also become a new world for the boards. So a board that had a 30-year leader that had run the organization well didn't really worry much about if the board meeting was going to go well, if the financials were well maintained, if the revenue streams were solid. They had 30 years of experience to rely on. So now these new leaders, again, some of which are moving into jobs with less than exact qualifications, are just going to need more board support. And sometimes the boards aren't ready for that because they've been a bit more hands-off because their leaders had been there so long and they had built up so much trust over the years. And honestly, new leaders are not interested in the same length of tenure that the departing leaders did. So a lot of leaders, as I said, 20-year tenures, 25-year tenures. Boards get very discouraged when we say to them, we're going to shoot for 5 to 7 years and we're going to celebrate the 5, right? And because they just had a leader who was there 25 years. So some of that is sort of reorienting your recruitment mindset as a board. And then just sort of landing on that flexibility issue, how much flexibility is right, is also the board struggle with that as well. There is also, obviously, wages are up. And what we see is there's almost a minimum pay expectation. There used to be, and there still is, you can align nonprofit pay with budget size. By budget size, I mean either revenue or expense size, like an ED running a nonprofit of $1 million size budget versus a 5, 25, 50, 100 million. You could almost track the wages up and see where the differential goes by the budget size. But what we found is there's a lot of people will just not take an ED job if they're not paid 100 grand. Like it almost feels like a bare minimum now. And for some really smaller nonprofits, it's really tough to justify that, especially after you had an ED who'd been there for 30 years, had been underpaid, started the nonprofit, did it all through love, and we're making 75,000, and you're going to now pay 100,000 for somebody with less experience who's not staying 25 years and doesn't know everything that the person that just walked out the door with. And that is a really tough struggle, both from a budget point of view, as well as a psychological point of view for organizations. And we do see it shifting a little, but candidates still hold more cards than the hiring company. There's still more jobs than people. And so they don't have to take your job, right? They have other jobs. I'm old enough to have worked in the 80s and the 90s and when, if you got a job, you took the job that you got because it was the one job that was available in the greater Boston area, right? now there is a lot of opportunity for people to step into these roles. So you have to really sell these jobs to them because they have options still. It's shifting a little, and we see, a little bit more in the favor of the employer, but it's still not the case. We see more opportunities for candidates than we see candidates for the opportunities. So then what I put together was what I thought were some of the ways that you all could position yourself well to sort of minimize, to mitigate the challenges that I just described. So first and foremost is having a clear, consistent, and responsive search process. So whether you work with a firm or whether you do it on your own, just clearly laying out how you're going to get this done, who's going to take the lead on the work, how you're going to interview, what your process is going to be like, what, tier it all out. How are we going to do our hire? What candidates get nervous about is a process that shifts on them. So, I say to the search committees I'm working with, are we going to do a first screening round, a first round in Zoom, another round in person? But what you can't do is surprise me at the end and say, oh, now they have to do an interview with the full board. Like, tell me that up front so I can tell the candidates exactly what the process is going to be, so they feel confident in the process and they feel like they're being treated well. So make sure whatever you do is like, here's how we're going to go through our process. Here's our committee. Here's how the work's going to be done. Here's how decisions are going to be made. And we're going to follow that process. And when we communicate with candidates, we communicate that clear process so they have confidence in us. Also, clear job expectations. We produce more what's called a position profile, which is more of a marketing piece, sort of describes the organization, the opportunities, and the job requirements. The end part feels a little bit more like the job description, but being clear with about what this job is about and what the opportunities and challenges ahead for the candidates is very helpful for them to understand the work. As Margot knows, we do a sort of a mini assessment up front to understand where the organization is, and we share that with finalists so that they have a good sense of the type of organization they're joining. Clear reporting relationships and authority. Leaders, people coming in like to see an org chart that makes sense. They like to understand what their authority is going to be, whether they're the C-suite employee or the chief executive. Again, murkiness makes people nervous. And again, they could take the job that has less murkiness than the job that you might be presenting with a lot more murkiness. I just saw that. I think too long, Michael, for a job description is, we tend to do like a 2 to 3 page position profile. I think after you get past that, it starts to feel a little overkill. And I think what people also overkill sometimes is the upfront about the organization. We do a nice crisp section on that with links to the client's website, because most candidates are going to click on that link and learn about the organization themselves. So don't overdo the whole of what we're about. They're going to go to the website to find that out. The other thing that's become challenging is some of these long-serving leaders, particularly founding leaders, want to stay on in the organization in some capacity. So some want to become a special advisor, some want to become a this and a this or a that, right? And boy, does it create challenges, right? So the boards really struggle from extricating themselves from the relationship, because most of the board members were recruited by that person many years ago. And that person is struggling to step away, even though they want to retire and move away from this role. So we try to be absolutely clear about this with our clients, but sometimes it's not possible. But we feel strongly about this, that we have a 1-year guarantee in our searches. So if we do a search and it doesn't pan out in a year, we do the search over for no cost. But our contract has like an addendum like this long of what doesn't qualify for that. And one of the things we added recently is we will no longer provide a guarantee if the departing CEO is staying in the organization in some capacity. That doesn't mean it can't be successful, but we have seen it not be successful so many times that, so if you're going to keep your CEO or executive director in some capacity, boy, it has to be clear what that is. And if the new CEO has authority over that person can't then go around to the board if they don't like what's it's really complicated. So just be aware of that. And so having that clarity will help you, because again, candidates are going to suss that out. Make sure your board best practices, again, many organizations where the board has had the same leader for 25, 30 years, they've probably not kept up on their board best practices because they had so much trust and faith. They may not have been doing performance reviews of the executive director because, he or she's been here 25 years. We trust them, right? So your new leader needs a performance evaluation. They need you to stay in the governance mode, not the management mode, right? So having that clarity is very important, because our candidates are interviewing the boards as well. When they come for their own interview, they're also talking to me privately about what they thought of the board, right? And they're like, yeah, you'd have a board of 14, but only 3 showed up at my interview. What does that tell me about the level of interest they actually have in me or being board members, right? So you have to be in a good position as a board to sell your organization as well. We have a pretty good track record of hiring and placing BIPOC candidates. We've been quite successful at organizations that are ready to accept BIPOC candidates, and many organizations aren't. So if that's something you really value and you want to really target, you have to have done the DEI work yourself. That is not only going to track those candidates, but also make them successful leaders. There's tons of articles on, oh gosh, I'm blanking. It's not the glass ceiling, but there's an article about, leaders of color coming into organization following white leaders, and the difference of expectations and the lack of success in many cases. So candidates of color are also scrutinizing whether that work has been done or not, and they do not want to represent the entire diversity for the organization. That is not the job they're signing on for in most cases. Sort of understanding you're selling a job. So understanding what is your competitive advantage as an organization? Is it that your mission is so compelling? Is it that you've got great revenue streams? You have diverse revenue streams. You have a super solid senior leadership team. And be honest about where you struggle a little, so that when you're recruiting people, what you can say with confidence, what makes you special, but you can also be honest about where your challenges might be and what your strategies would be to address those. Move as quickly as possible. And this is something that I have to say, the pandemic has quickened search. So we used to do so much work in person. So much of it is now done by Zoom. We do an initial screening interview by Zoom. Most of our search committees want to do a first round interview by Zoom. So we really don't do final interviews until the in-person interviews at the end of a process. And that has moved things quickly. And our clients have also moved more quickly. It used to be, back in the day, it's like, get us the pool of everybody that might be interested in this job. Now it's like, get me a pool of 4 to 5 that are great, that could take this job, and let's move them through the process quickly, because they're also interviewing at other places and we don't want to lose them. So we have found that our clients move faster than they did before the pandemic, and they're more comfortable using virtual interviewing strategies than they used to be. As flexible as you can be in geographic, remote, hybrid, it opens up your pool of candidates. But not everybody can be flexible, nor is it right to be so. For example, I'm doing a search right now for a place called Sustainable Connecticut, which is an environmental organization in Connecticut. They are willing to be flexible for somebody within Connecticut, but the person has to be in Connecticut. it feels sort of impossible for sustainable Connecticut to have somebody in another state, because it's about how is Connecticut sustainable, but they're willing to have somebody be remote in some part of Connecticut. And, so that's the level of flexibility they were able to do. And then if you can provide incentives at offers, at times that's great. And not everybody, again, has the ability to do this, particularly on the financial side. Almost every one of our search clients fold on start date immediately. Once they find the person they like, if the person says it's going to take me 2 months to get there, they're waiting the 2 months, right? Like once you've found the person, you've lost all. They're going to hold the card. So just let that go. Once they get there, they're going to be great. Don't, forcing an extra week earlier is not going to let them transition in the way that they need to, so that they can come in refreshed. Providing them training if they need it. Not everybody is going to have, as I said, the same skill set, your 35-year leader. So if they've never worked with a board before, send them some board source training, get them trained up on the areas that they need to. Margot and I are both coaches, and many, many new EDs come in with coaching agreements in their offer letters, usually a 6-month or a year coaching agreement for their first year. They're usually stepping into an ED role for the first time, and they want somebody to bounce ideas off of, and not expose themselves to their board all the time, or push down to their staff to, they want to have a way to pressure test their ideas and to get some advice and to just share their feelings about their job. If you can offer a signing or other bonus, it's great. Not everybody can. And then do commit to a performance review. Again, a lot of groups, your leader had been there a long time. You might not have done performance reviews previously, or you relax on them. Your new leader needs to have a performance review. They want a performance review. They want it because they want to know if they're doing well, but they also want to know that you care enough to do a performance review of them and actually give them some feedback and help them develop as a professional. So those are the ways that we find that you can sort of position yourself well as an employer of choice. And now I just babbled on for, let's see, 25 minutes. So I am going to stop, and no question is too big or too small. And if I don't know the answer, I won't make something up. But I'll see if we have any questions. Then take a sip of tea. Why don't I just see, do those challenges resonate with people? Do they feel like the challenges you've addressed? Well, I've got a lot of headshots, so nobody's going. I got Margaret.
John, yeah, great points. I mean, I'm so glad you mentioned some of those things, particularly around executive directors staying around after their tenure is up. But I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
And this is about internal candidates. How do you handle internal candidates in the search process? And if an internal candidate who's very good isn't hired ultimately as the CEO, how do you advise the new CEO to handle that, or what kind of support do you provide to the organization to try to keep that person if possible?
Yeah, thanks, Mauro. We do see a lot of internal candidates in jobs. I'd say probably maybe 40% of the time there's an internal candidate that applies. We're usually very excited about it because usually, first of all, I've been an internal candidate a couple of times at jobs. Both times I didn't get the job, and both times I left. So it really depends on the individual. What we describe to our search committees is we're going to treat internal candidates exactly the same way as external candidates. They're going to go through the exact same process. They're going to screen with me. And we say, we encourage our groups to cut them. I know that's a terrible term, is to eliminate them as soon as you've decided they're not going to get the job, rather than dragging them along through a process and, where you're not taking them seriously. So for example, I've had internal candidates apply that were totally underqualified for the job. I run it by the client. I say, so-and-so has applied. They are not qualified. I'm not even going to screen them. I'm going to talk to them and tell them why they're not getting a screening interview. So we don't encourage them that was the right. If somebody's strong enough, I screen them like I screen other candidates, and I present them to the client to evaluate them against other candidates. Many times they'll choose to interview them. If they don't make it through the first round interview and become a second round candidate, I'm the one who I do all the communication with the internal candidates, not the client. And because we do our 95% of our job is telling people no, right? Because one person gets every job, everybody else does not get the job. So I know how to tell people no in a way that they can feel as good as possible. I tell them why we're not advancing them. And then we have I think the hardest, Margot, is if they become the finalist and they still don't get the job.
Yeah.
And that has happened. I have one right now where we had 3 finalists. One was an internal candidate, and I'm negotiating right now with somebody who's not the internal candidate, right? And he's not going to get the job. And I will be the one that will tell him eventually. And sometimes you can keep them and sometimes you can't. You just don't know how people are going to feel emotionally about it. And but if they were treated well in the process, you have a better chance of keeping them. But if they felt like they were monkeyed around in the process and treated poorly, the process will even make them leave more quickly because they feel like they were not well respected. So we love when internal candidates apply because it usually shows that the organization is and most people that apply are qualified. You don't get, there's only occasionally you get a staff member where you're like, really, like they're so unqualified for the job, and they usually have an axe to grind, right? Like there's something else going on. It's not really about the job, but yeah, we try to handle them with care.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, there is a question in the chat room from
Yeah.
Stephanie. Stephanie, do you want to ask that yourself if you want to unmute yourself or?
I feel
you
like I know
available,
Stephanie as well.
Stephanie Page?
Stephanie. Oh, I
Are
said
you
Stephanie.
available to unmute yourself? Otherwise, I'll.
Yeah, I thank you. No, I was just wondering about contracts, what the benefits are of having a contract with an executive director instead of just hiring them as an employee like you would.
Sure. Most of our organizations that we work with still do sort of at-will offer letters where there is not a contract. The exceptions are schools. We do a fair number of school searches, particularly charter schools, and we've also done some associations, trade associations like National Tour Association, Tourism Cares that are sort of, and trade associations typically have contracts. It's sort of an industry standard that they'll have a contract with their leader. They tend to be 3-year contracts. In reality, all the contracts that I've ever seen have so many out clauses that it really is almost a at-will contract. The only difference is the payout if you get let go. And usually people are negotiating that I get X amount of days notice. And if I leave without, if you ask me to leave without cause before the contract ends, you have to pay me 30, 60, 90, 120 days of pay. And, you know, so some people like to have a contract, but it almost feels a bit at will in the end. Anyway, it does. We will do the offer letters. If it gets into a contract, most of our organizations have a legal, we encourage them to have their own legal advisors draw up the contract.
Great, thank you.
I had a quick question, John. Thank you for an excellent presentation, by the way.
Thanks, David.
I'm curious about what you're seeing out there in terms of compensation ranges. You mentioned that it changes with the budget size. Can you enlighten a little bit on, say, the 1 to 10 range and then 25 and above, what you're seeing in terms of ranges and what those compensation packages are typically composed of?
Yeah. So I'd say the majority of we tend to be working with smaller nonprofits, so anywhere from $1 million to 25 million, but then we have a number that are in the 25 to 100 million. You know, I'd say most of our ED hires are in the there are some that are still in the 90 to 110 range, which tend to be smaller type of organizations, sort of $1 million budgets, and might be an eclectic or a very much on the social justice or social service side, where the pay is just depressed sort of industry wide. I'd say most of our CEO hires are between 140 and 200, is regardless of, and it does shift by budget size. And then when we're working with CDCs or organizations that have a lot of assets in terms of property and such, they're much closer to the 175 to 250 range. Where we're seeing CFOs are commanding quite a bit. I'd say most of our CFO hires are in the 150 to 225 range right now. And then I'd say the chief operating and chief program officers are also in that probably 140 to 175 range is typically where we're landing.
Great, thank you.
But these days, all of our clients do post salary ranges as a nod to equity, and we encourage all of our clients to post a salary range. And most of them are nervous about it. They're like, well, of course, if you post the range, the candidate's going to want the top of the range, right? Like that's always what people say. And honestly, candidates are realistic about where they are in a range. They'll push it a little, but they don't always get the top of the range. And then sometimes our clients will go above the range, and then the discussion with the committee at the end is like, well, if we could have gone above the range, why didn't we advertise above the range? We would have got a different pool of candidates. So we try to have our clients push themselves to the max that they can do in the reality of what they can pay. And most of the ranges are for lower pay, the ranges tend to be like 20,000. So if you're like 90 to 110, 100 to 120, 125 to 140. When you get into the 150s, the range might be a little broader, maybe up to 25 or 30,000. So you might see, like we've done 180 to 210, right? Which is a pretty big range, $30,000.
Very helpful, thank you.
Yeah. And we do we buy some data for salary, and we've done enough placements that we give our clients some advice on, where we think the range could be. And the other thing is, the old days, and I'm sure Margaret remember this, you'd sit down and you'd interviewing a super great candidate, and this before you post anything, you're like, I got the best guy or woman that's going to take this job. And you say, so what are you looking for pay for this job? And they're like, well, I'm looking for about 325,000. And you're like, okay, well, that was a wasted hour. I'm never getting back. So we like it as search firms that we know people that are talking to us understand the range and they're willing to take the job in the range. So it also quickens the process, to be honest with you.
There's a question from Mark Logan in the chat room.
Oh, I won't take that from Mark. I know Mark personally. There's no way. Hey, Mark.
So if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi, John. Yeah,
Hey,
thanks,
Mark. Good to see you.
How are you?
Good.
Good. Hey, it's great to see you. Thanks for the presentation. I wrote a book chapter there, so people don't need to read the whole thing. But no, a lot of what you were saying resonated with where we are, what I've been seeing, especially over the last couple of years. So it's great in a way to see that we are not outside the norm. So that was good. But one thing we I really have seen is coming into nonprofit was small and really helped it grow over the last few years, where we are expanding in staff and leadership and in other staffing roles. But those who would be considered internally to come up, they don't have any real leadership, supervisory experience or management experience, right? So it's really hard as we're growing to structure, stabilizing, and grow to have that. At the same time, bringing people in who really, I've really found, and I shouldn't be surprised, don't have, and I haven't found them skillful in managing the remote employee or the hybrid employee or the multiple categories that you can have, which we have there. Any resources that you can point me to around that? Because that's really essential, is to make sure that they have the skills and the support to develop in their roles.
Boy, I wish I did. I'm going to write that down, Mark, because I don't, my colleagues might, but that is something that is a problem, to be honest with you, is most people were, if they had management experience, they were trained in managing people on site.
Right.
And they were skilled at that, and they saw them and they could communicate with them in person. And now you might have, well, my daughter-in-law works at Sanofi, the drug company in Cambridge. She's a case manager over there. She has to go into the office one Tuesday every other week. That is it. Right. So I don't know how her manager manages her. Right. And her manager is maybe 3 years older than her, right, and doesn't have tons of experience. So I think that's a great. I will look into that because I don't know the answer to that, Mark, because I think that's something everybody is struggling with, especially if you have all different. You have some in person, some remote,
right,
some hybrid, and people I hired someone. Mark was a school leader before. I hired a school leader to run a school that was closed in the pandemic. Never got to go see the school. We showed videos of what the school, it was tough for a while there, and didn't pan out, to be honest with you. The person didn't last. And I don't have the answer to that, but I as somebody who used to manage people, I'm not, I wouldn't be excited about it.
right.
I had when I worked at Jumpstart, which is a national nonprofit, I had 5 direct reports that were in San Francisco, New York, Chicago, and Atlanta, and it was always virtual. So I got used to it, but that was the nature. We developed our business around that before others did.
Thanks, John.
Hey, Mike.
John. Oops.
You're there. We can hear you.
Okay. I'm an interim director working for an advisory council. We don't actually have a board. And the advisory council is trying to find a full-time replacement for me because I'd like to go back to being retired.
Yeah.
But the challenge is this group wants the new executive director to lead the strategic planning process to determine what the future of the organization is going to be. And I'm wondering, shouldn't we do that first so we know what kind of person we're looking for?
That's a tough one. I mean, that's a conundrum because there's a little bit of like, we want the new person to be able to have their own imprint. So if they come and it's a little bit more of a blank slate, they can help us provide that direction. But if it's such a blank slate, how do you know who to recruit, right? Or if you're going to be, I think my sense is a little bit of, maybe not a whole strategic plan, but at least some, I mean, I think Margo might even have a better, would you consider maybe like a strategic outline and maybe what some principal objectives?
Yeah,
Put you on the spot, Margo.
No, I think that's right. I mean, it is a conundrum, no question about it. And I've just been through a situation similar to that. I was not doing hiring, but I was working with an executive director whose board was completely turning over. And his question was, should we bring new board members in and then do the strategic plan? Or should we work with the current board and do a strategic plan so we'll know who to bring into the board? And I sort of think John's theory is a great one, which is a framework. What are our key priorities that we need to be looking at over the next 3 to 5 years? And within that, there may be some good clues about recruitment.
Yeah. Even if you come up with like our 3 external foci are going to be these, and our 2 internal things we have to work on are this. So at least you have something to go out, because that's a tough sell too. Like, so if I'm the recruiter trying to sell that job, it's like, well, you got an advisory board. Well, what's their strategy? Well, they're going to work that up when you get there. But what am I going to work on? I don't know. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
Trust me.
Yeah.
Trust me. And I've got the 72 Chevy I can sell you at the same time.
There's a question from Kathleen.
Is this a new role that hasn't existed before? That's
Correct.
now been so it's a new role in the org chart who's going to.
Yes.
People are now going to be reporting to this person where they reported to someone else before. Sort of just be as clear as you can about those reporting relationships, and maybe doing some of the legwork with the staff people don't really like having their reporting relationships changed, especially if they feel it as a demotion. And typically a VP means that you're inserting somebody in between them and the CEO or somebody higher. So now they have to report to somebody new, and they can start to feel that as, boy, I just got demoted. So I think you know, if you can tie that change to the strategic direction and of the organization and why that change is made, and it's not about you or individuals, it's really about where we need to go as an organization. And this is going to benefit you, this new reporting relationship by XYZ, right? Like this is going to be helpful for all of us. But that's a tough one because people, I have a client that I'm working with that is exactly what they've experienced. And most of the staff felt pretty good about it. But that was a situation where the CEO was very stretched and people weren't getting access to him anyway. So they feel like this has allowed them some access that they weren't having prior. But not everyone will feel that way. It's not an easy one.
I think it's pretty much accepted, but it's almost an elephant that's not talked about.
Yeah, well, there you go. Well, we're not all good about those direct conversations, right? Like it's hard to have those, you know, yeah. Yeah, well, maybe you got to ride the elephant into the room, Kathleen.
Which would be?
Bring it up and sort of like, I think we should have a conversation about it because it's there anyway. What doesn't get talked about in the organization is being talked about in the organization anyway. You're just not controlling how it's being talked about.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, they're talking. There's nothing like, again, I know Mark from schools. I mean, nothing happens at a school that not everybody knows, and everybody knows what's happening in a school at all times. They're a hotbed of gossip.
How do you
I love schools. I just made to make it clear. I love schools, but they are a hotbed of gossip.
Yeah.
You know, just to offer quickly, I became the chief operating officer of a large organization who had not had a chief operating officer before. And so there were a lot of direct reports who had been reporting to the CEO who are suddenly reporting to me. And I expected people not to be thrilled, knowing that I might not have been thrilled in their position. But what I did was I just spent a lot of time with those folks. And by the end of 3 or 4 months, they were all feeling like, you know, they had never had as much access to the CEO as they did to me. And so John's point is a really good one. I think a good new VP will figure out that is something that they can bring that will be a real asset for folks.
I think thank you for that. I think one of the problems could be that a lot of people would like to report to the new person and ignore the old person.
Okay. Well, that sounds like another can of worms, but yeah. Yeah, so I'd say, to Margot's point, if you do recruit this new person, not just recruiting for whatever technical skill they have, but having strong interpersonal and understanding, you know, human dynamics, I think will be important. And then hopefully somebody will have a direct conversation with the person that no one wants to report to about why they don't want to report to them.
Thank you both.
Yeah. Cool.
We probably have time for one more question. Someone want to either raise your hand or pop it in the chat. Here's your chance. Otherwise,
so let me ask a question, because this is something John raised, the issue about long-term executive directors and founders. I mean, John, I've heard from various sources that very often the person following that founder or long-term director doesn't make it. What has been your experience with that?
Absolutely true. And candidates know that, right? So candidates are well aware of that. And that is, so when we take on searches where somebody's been there a long time, we're clear with the board that this is going to be a challenge. Candidates are going to be concerned about that. So we need to have clarity again. Like, how are we going to set this person up for success so they don't fall into that trap of, you know, I always joke either, you know, if we love the ED, we want the clone. And if we couldn't stand them, we want the diametrically opposed opposite, right? And it's like, it's not the answer, but the person has to be set up, because candidates know that, to be honest with you. And they're like, I'll wait it out till the next person shows up. It doesn't go so well for them. They'll clean the house. That's where like something like what Michael's doing, like having an interim in
Yeah.
can sometimes clear the air a little bit and give a little space between the problem is in a lot of sectors, you can't find interims. I'm talking about schools again. School interims are tough to find. So if a leader steps away, there's not a lot of great interims to come in and run the school for a year. And there's not really a great network to find interims either. We have a few on our website of partner organizations that do interim placements. But you sort of have to search them out. I saw Stephanie's hand up somewhere, but she's gone. Oh, well, somebody had a hand up. Dawn has her hand up, and I know Dawn, I think.
Well, you may. A lot of people know me, and I've come to other nonprofit things. You started talking about interim managers, and I think you sort of answered the question. There aren't really good resources for finding interim executive directors. But you said that there are some up on your website.
Yeah, look on our website on our resource page. We have 3 partner organizations that we refer to often for people that, and they do interim placements around the country.
Okay, and is that true not only for the schools that use
those are predominantly not schools. Those are predominantly nonprofit interim placements. The schools are the ones that are harder to find in my experience.
Great. Okay, thank you.
All right.
Okay, we're coming up on 1 o'clock. I want to thank John Tarvin of Eos Transition Partners. Thank you so much. This presentation is recorded and will be available on our website shortly. I ask that you take the survey at the conclusion of when you log out of Zoom. It's very helpful to get the feedback from everyone on our programming. We depend on your financial support as well. We're a community-supported, 100% volunteer-run nonprofit, and it's very, very helpful for us to get the support from the community to keep going.